They say the mate bond is destiny, written in starlight before your first breath. But for 21-year-old Louise, her pack didn't see fate in her silence, they saw an abomination. Trapped in the Northern Territories where pack law was as brutal as the winter, she woke up every full moon expecting claws and went to bed tasting blood. She thought this was her life, to be torn apart by wolves who should have protected her until she stopped breathing. But the moon goddess has a vicious sense of timing. Sometimes salvation doesn't arrive as a hero's hell. Sometimes it comes as two ice-eyed demons from the frozen wastes. Alphas the pack spoke of in hushed terror. Alphas who didn't negotiate. This is the story of how twin monsters stole a shattered Omega from execution and the devastating power she awakened in the snow. The cold in Shadowcrest territory didn't just chill your bones. It crawled inside you like a living thing and made a nest in your lungs. It was the night of the Moon Festival, and the scent of pine smoke and roasting meat saturated the air, mingling with something sharper, the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of fear that clung to Louise's skin like a second layer. She knelt in the festival clearing, her knees digging into frozen earth, hands trembling not from cold but from the certainty of what came next. She didn't dare lift her eyes. She could hear the rhythmic crunch of boots circling her. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the sound of a countdown. Still can't hear your wolf, can you? A voice sneered, thick with contempt and something darker. Louise flinched. It was a response carved into her muscle memory through years of survival. No, Beta Jones, she whispered. I'm sorry. Jones didn't look like a pack. He looked like a predator that had forgotten how to pretend to be civilized. His face was all sharp angles and harder edges, his eyes reflecting the bonfire like twin coals, and his cruelty was as reliable as the phases of the moon. He crouched down beside her, the leather of his jacket creaking, and grabbed her chin with fingers that left bruises. Look at me when I'm talking to you, defect. Louise raised her gaze slowly, meeting his stare for the briefest moment before dropping her eyes again. It was a careful dance she'd perfected, submissive enough to avoid the worst punishments, defiant enough to remember she was still alive. Around them, the pack celebrated under the full moon. Wolves in human skin laughed and drank and told stories, their voices rising in harmony with distant howls from the forest. No one looked toward the clearing's edge where Louise knelt. No one ever looked. The elders have decided, Jones announced, loud enough for the nearest wolves to hear, though none stopped their revelry. An Omega who can't hear her wolf is an insult to the moon goddess. You've been tolerated long enough. He released her chin with a shove that sent her sprawling onto her hands. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through her malnourished frame. Consider this mercy. We're giving you a chance to run. Louise's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged animal. She knew what this was. The hunt. The pack's favorite game for disposing of problems. They'd give her a head start into the forest, let her believe in the possibility of escape, and then they'd come for her with teeth and claws. She'd watched them do it before to an elder wolf who'd gone rogue. They'd brought back nothing but bones. Get up, Jones commanded. She pushed herself to her feet, her threadbare dress, the only one she owned, offering no protection against the winter wind that cut through the clearing. Her blonde hair, tangled and matted, fell across her face as she stood on shaking legs. You have until I count to 50. Run, little defect. Run fast. Louise didn't wait for him to start counting. She bolted. The forest swallowed her whole. Branches whipped her face and tore at her dress as she crashed through the underbrush, her breath coming in panicked gasps that crystallized in the frozen air. Behind her, she could hear them beginning the count, their voices rising in a chant that echoed through the trees. 10. 20. 30. She had no plan. There was nowhere to go. The Shadowcrest territory stretched for miles in every direction, and even if she made it to the border, no pack would take in a defective Omega. She was packless without being free of pack law. She was prey wearing a wolf's skin. Her foot caught on a root and she went down hard, skidding across ice and dead leaves. Pain exploded in her shoulder, and she felt something warm and wet, blood, begin to soak through her dress. 50. The howl that followed wasn't a number. It was a promise. Louise scrambled to her feet and kept running, even as her vision blurred with tears and her legs screamed for her to stop. She could hear them now, crashing through the forest behind her. Not in wolf form yet, they wanted to savor this, to let the fear marinate before they ended it. She burst into a small clearing and her feet went out from under her. The ground wasn't earth here, it was a frozen stream, slick as glass. She hit the ice hard, the breath punching out of her lungs. For a moment, she lay there, staring up at the full moon through the bare branches. It looked back at her with cold indifference. This is how I die, she thought with strange clarity. Alone. Silent. Forgotten. The ice cracked beneath her. Not from her weight, from something else. From footsteps. Heavy ones. Louise's survival instinct kicked in and she rolled, scrambling toward the bank, but she wasn't fast enough. A claw wrapped around her ankle and yanked her back to the center of the ice. Jones loomed over her, his eyes reflecting gold in the moonlight, his canines elongated past humans. Thought you'd make it farther than this, he said, his voice distorted by a partial shift. Disappointing. He raised his clawed hand. Louise closed her eyes. The blow never came. Instead, the night exploded with a sound that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a roar. It was something ancient and terrible that made the ice beneath them vibrate. Jones's hand froze mid-swing. Louise's eyes snapped open. Standing at the edge of the clearing were two figures that didn't belong in any story she knew. They were massive, easily towering over Jones's considerable height, their long dark hair streaked with silver falling past their shoulders. But it was their eyes that stopped her heart. Glowing ice blue. Not wolf gold. Ice blue, like frozen lightning, like winter given consciousness and rage. The frozen Alpha brothers. That's far enough, one of them said, his voice so cold it seemed to drop the temperature another 10 degrees. It wasn't a request. It was a fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had never been questioned. Jones snarled, his partial shift completing as fur rippled across his skin. This is Shadowcrest business. Turn around and crawl back to your frozen wasteland before. He didn't finish the sentence. The second brother moved, and it wasn't movement so much as it was displacement. One moment he stood at the clearing's edge, the next his hand was wrapped around Jones's throat, lifting the bait off the ground as if he weighed nothing. Before what? The brother asked, his voice a shade warmer than his twins, which meant it was merely lethal instead of arctic. Finish your threat. We're listening. Jones struggled, clawing at the hand around his throat, but he might as well have been fighting stone. The first brother walked across the ice toward Louise with measured steps, his boots somehow not slipping on the surface that had defeated her. He crouched beside her, those impossible blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that felt like being dissected. You're hurt, he observed. Not a question. A statement. Louise tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Please. She wasn't sure what she was asking for. Mercy? A quick death? For him to stop looking at her like she was something fragile and precious when she knew she was neither? The brother's jaw tightened. He looked over his shoulder at his twin, who still held Jones suspended. Gerardo. Sent her. The one called Gerardo inhaled deeply, his eyes narrowing. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that could cut through steel. Omega. Abused. Starved. A pause, and then something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pain. Broken. I'm not, Louise started, but her protest died when the first brother reached out and gently, so gently it made her want to weep and brush her matted hair away from her face. His fingers were calloused and cold, but they trembled slightly as they touched her skin. Brian, Gerardo said, his voice strange. Do you feel? Yes. The one named Brian didn't take his eyes off Louise. I feel it. Later, Louise would learn that what they felt was the mate bond, snapping into place like a steel trap made of starlight. That the golden thread that suddenly burned between the three of them was destiny's way of saying, here, I made this for you. That twin alphas were never supposed to share a mate because the bond would tear them and her apart. But in that moment, all she understood was that when Brian carefully lifted her from the ice, cradling her against his chest like she might shatter if he held her too tight, it was the first time in her life that someone had touched her without meaning to hurt her. And when Gerardo turned back to Jones, still hanging from his grip, and said in a voice that promised death, "Tell your pack the Frostborn claim what is ours," Louise felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten the word for it. Hope. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was the wet sound of Jones hitting the ground and the synchronized howl of two wolves that made every animal in the forest go silent. The frozen alphas had found their mate. And Shadowcrest territory had just declared war on the wrong monsters. Louise had learned to make herself invisible. It was a survival skill honed through 21 winters of Shadowcrest territory's dirty secret, the Omega who couldn't hear her wolf. Tonight, as the Moon Festival transformed the pack grounds into something between sacred ritual and carnival, she moved through the crowd like a ghost, carrying platters of venison and mead that no one thanked her for. The hierarchy was brutally visible. Alphas lounged by the bonfire like kings, betas prowled the perimeter, and Omega the functional ones served with choreographed deference. Louise was something else entirely. Something less. Jones found her near the serving tables, because Jones always found her. The beta had tormented her into an art form. Well, he drawled, his voice thick with mockery and something darker. Look who's still pretending to be a pack. He circled her slowly, a predator savoring the hunt. Tell me, Defect, do you dream about your wolf? The one that doesn't exist? His enforcers laughed, a chorus of cruelty that other pack members studiously ignored. I'm sorry, Louise whispered, the automatic apology she'd learned to deploy like armor. Jones grabbed her wrist, his grip crushing. You're sorry, he repeated, his voice dropping to something intimate and vicious. But tonight, little Defect, your apologies run out. The sacred ceremony began as the moon reached its apex. The Alpha's howl cut through the celebration, summoning the pack to the ancient clearing. Louise tried to slip away, but Jones's grip had become a shackle. You're not going anywhere, he said, loud enough for others to hear. The elders want a word. Terror crystallized in Louise's chest. When the elders wanted to speak with you in Shadowcrest, it meant exile or execution. Jones dragged her through the crowd, which parted like water around filth, their faces reflecting everything from disgust to pity to relief. The enforcers fell in behind them. They didn't take her to the ceremonial platform. They took her into the forest, away from witnesses, where the trees grew so thick the moon barely penetrated. Jones threw her down, and she hit the earth with an impact that punched the air from her lungs. Get up, someone snarled. A boot connected with her ribs once, twice, 3 times. She heard something crack. The beating was methodical. Practiced. They knew exactly how to hurt her without killing her too quickly. Louise stopped trying to protect herself. There was no point. No one was coming. She curled into herself and let her mind drift somewhere else, somewhere far away where wolves didn't hate what they didn't understand. Above the sounds of fists and boots, she could hear the pack celebrating. The festival continued, unconcerned. When they finally stopped, Louise couldn't move. Couldn't think beyond the cascading waves of pain that radiated from everywhere and nowhere. Jones crouched beside her, his breathing barely elevated despite the exertion of her destruction. The moon goddess doesn't want you, he said, almost conversationally. Your wolf doesn't want you. Even your own pack doesn't want you. So here's what's going to happen, Defect. You're going to die here in the snow, alone, and we're going to go back to the festival and forget you ever polluted our bloodline. Consider it mercy. They left her there. The sound of their footsteps faded, replaced by distant music and her own shallow breathing. Louise stared up at the moon through bare branches, its silver face cold and indifferent. Blood pooled beneath her, steaming in the frozen air. She'd always wondered what dying would feel like. Now she knew, it felt like nothing. Like she'd already been dead for years and her body was just catching up. She closed her eyes and accepted it. The silence. The darkness. The mercy of finally being done with survival. She accepted that she would die unmourned and unmissed, just another broken thing the pack had discarded. The snow began to fall, gentle and relentless, already covering the evidence. By morning, there would be nothing but white. Louise's last coherent thought before consciousness slipped was a bitter prayer. If you're real, and if you care at all, then let this be quick. Let me go before I feel it. The moon, as always, didn't answer. The music played on. And Louise, the defective Omega, lay bleeding in the snow and waited for the cold to finish what cruelty had started. This was her ending. Alone. Silent. Forgotten. The frozen Alpha brothers moved through Shadowcrest territory like winter itself, silent, inevitable, deadly. Gerardo led, ice-blue eyes scanning the festival with predatory precision. Brian followed 3 steps behind, hand resting on a blade that had tasted alpha blood. They weren't here for celebration. They were here for theft. Someone had stolen Frostborn artifacts, ancient relics holding power that could crack the world open. The music grated against Gerardo's nerves. These southern packs had forgotten what real monsters looked like. Storage building, Brian murmured. I can smell the vault stone. Then the wind shifted. The scent hit them simultaneously with blood and Omega. Their Omega. The mate bond didn't snap gently. It detonated like lightning wrapped in ice, a golden thread that burned through their chests and rewired their existence between heartbeats. Gerardo staggered, his hand flying to his sternum. Brian made a sound that wasn't quite human. North, Gerardo snarled. Now. They ran, following that golden thread that pulled urgent and demanding. The scent grew stronger, and underneath it all was Omega distress so thick it coated the back of Gerardo's throat. They found her in a clearing, half buried in snow already pink with her blood. Louise. They didn't know her name yet, but the bond whispered mine, ours, protect with such ferocity that rational thought became optional. She was small, broken, her body a canvas of methodical cruelty. Her dress was torn, blonde hair matted with blood and ice, breathing in shallow gasps that said she was closer to death than survival. Brian dropped beside her, his hands hovering as if afraid she'd shatter. She's been beaten, he said, his voice hollow with rage so complete it had looped back around to something like calm. Ribs broken. Internal bleeding. Hypothermic. He looked up at Gerardo, and his ice-blue eyes, eyes that had watched empires fall, held something new. She's dying. No. Gerardo wrapped his coat around her with impossible gentleness. The mate bond held for vengeance. Track them. Brian inhaled. 5. Beta and 4 enforcers. At the festival. Not for long. Gerardo lifted her into his arms. She was weightless, all bones and fear. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused. We have you now, he murmured. No one touches you again. They emerged from the forest like nightmares made flesh of 2 massive alphas radiating power, carrying a broken Omega bleeding into the snow. The festival died in waves as wolves turned to stare. Guards moved to intercept, hands on weapons. That Omega is pack property. Brian moved. His hand wrapped around the guard's throat, lifting him effortlessly. Say property again. Brian. Gerardo's quiet command. His brother released the guard. We're leaving. Anyone who stops us dies. Tell your Alpha the Frostborn twins have claimed their mate. When she survives, we return to discuss the consequences. Jones pushed through the crowd, fury warring with fear. You can't, she's Shadowcrest. Finish that sentence and I remove your ability to speak. Gerardo's voice went sub-zero. The Beta's wolf recoiled from the dominance rolling off the twins. This was something older than Southern Pack hierarchies. She is our mate. And you, Beta, have committed an act of war. The twins walked through the stunned crowd, their mate cradled carefully between them. Louise's blood dripped into the snow, leaving a trail that looked like an accusation. Behind them, the Shadowcrest pack stood frozen, caught between disbelief and dawning realization that they'd just tortured the mate of the most dangerous alphas in the Northern Territories. The Frostborn twins. The Ice Demons. The brothers who'd raised an entire pack for far less than this. As they crossed the boundary marker, a declaration of war in itself, Gerardo looked down at the small, broken thing in his arms and felt the mate bond sing with desperate urgency. Hold on, he whispered against her hair. Just hold on. We're taking you home. Behind them, the Moon Festival dissolved into chaos as wolves scrambled to prepare for the war that was now inevitable. Ahead, in the frozen wastes where winter never truly ended, their fortress waited. And between them, barely breathing, was the Omega who would change everything if she survived the night. Pain was the first thing Louise became aware of, bone-weary and all-consuming. The second was warmth. Real warmth. The third was wrong. Everything was wrong. The bed was too soft, the air smelled like pine instead of blood, and she didn't recognize the ceiling. Panic hit. Louise tried to sit up and her ribs screamed in protest. Her hands scrabbled at unfamiliar blankets, at bandages, at a nightgown that wasn't her dress. Jones. The beating. Dying. She should be dead. Easy, a voice said, and Louise's head snapped toward the sound. An alpha stood in the doorway, dark hair streaked with silver, ice-blue eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. Recognition crashed through her fragmented thoughts. The frozen alphas. The ones from the forest. Stay away from me, she rasped, her voice raw and broken. She tried to move but her body refused. Fresh tears of frustration and terror burned her eyes. The alpha Brian, something whispered in her mind, held up his hands. You're safe. No one here will harm you. I swear it's on the moon. Liars, Louise whispered. Wolves lie. Alphas lie. Move, another voice commanded. Gerardo entered with measured steps, like approaching a wounded animal. Which she was. You've been unconscious for 2 days. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, hypothermia, and malnutrition that predates your beating by months. Our healer stabilized you, but you need rest and food. His clinical detachment was somehow more frightening than Brian's warmth. Louise pressed back against the headboard, ignoring how the movement made her ribs sing with agony. Where am I? Frostborn Fortress. The heart of the frozen wastes. You are under our protection. I don't want your protection. The venom in her own voice surprised her. Just tell me what you want from me. What are you going to do to me? Something flickered across Gerardo's face. Brian made a wounded sound. We want nothing except to keep you alive. Safe. He exchanged a glance with his brother. To honor the mate bond. You are our fated mate. The bond snapped when we found you. Surely you felt it? Louise stared. Then she laughed, a broken sound that hurt everywhere. Mate bond, she repeated. Me. The defective Omega who can't even hear her wolf. You're claiming I'm your mate? The laughter dissolved into sobbing. That's a new kind of cruelty. I'll give you points for creativity. It's not cruelty, Brian said, stepping closer despite Gerardo's warning hand. It's true. We felt it burn through us like lightning. You must have felt something. I felt like dying, Louise interrupted. I felt cold and pain and relief that it was finally over. That's what I felt. She looked between these massive alphas with their glowing eyes and impossible claim. Omegas like me don't get mate bonds. We get beaten and told we're abominations. So whatever this game is, whatever you actually want, just say it. I'm too tired to pretend. Gerardo sat beside the bed, deliberately less threatening. This is not a game. In 2 days, you'll be strong enough to meet our pack. Until then, he gestured toward a laden table. Eat. Heal. You are safe here. They left. Louise stared at the food, roasted meat, fresh bread, perfect fruit. Her stomach was cramped. Slowly, expecting a trap, she reached for the bread. No one stopped her. She took a bite, and it tasted like safety. She ate until sick with fullness, then curled up and cried. Not from pain, but from the terrible, fragile thing that might have been hope. 2 days later, Louise stood in the great hall of Frostborn Fortress, supported by Brian's careful grip on her elbow, and watched as an entire pack stared at her with something between shock and reverence. Our mate, Gerardo announced to the assembled wolves. Our Luna. She will be treated with the respect and protection afforded to the mate of your alphas. The pack bowed. Every single one of them. And Louise, who'd spent 21 years being invisible, who'd been beaten for existing, who'd accepted her death in the snow, she stood there and felt something inside her begin to break. Not the bad kind of breaking. The kind that happened when you'd been holding yourself together with nothing but fear for so long that you'd forgotten what it felt like to let go. That night, alone in her room with guards posted outside her door for her protection rather than to keep her prisoner, Louise dreamed of Shadowcrest. Of Jones's fists and the pack's laughter and the cold snow stained pink with her blood. She woke screaming, and found Brian sitting in the chair beside her bed, his presence solid and watchful. You're safe, he murmured. I've got you. You're safe. And for the first time in her life, Louise let herself believe it might be true. Daily life in the Frostborn Fortress wasn't what Louise expected. She'd braced herself for a cage lined with silk instead of iron, for kindness that would curdle into cruelty once she stopped being novel. But the brothers moved through each day like they were defusing a bomb, careful, deliberate, terrified of the wrong move. Gerardo woke her with breakfast he'd prepared himself, setting the tray down with hands that could crush skulls but trembled slightly when they brushed hers. Brian taught her the fortress layout, narrating exits and safe rooms like he was preparing her to run, not trying to trap her. The contradiction made her head spin. Combat training, Gerardo announced on her 4th morning of healing. Louise stared at him like he'd suggested she sprout wings. I can't fight, she said automatically. It was truth worn into her bones. Omegas didn't fight. Defective Omegas especially didn't fight. You will learn. Not a request. But when he led her to the training yard, his hand hovered at her lower back without touching, giving her space to refuse. The memory crashed through her without warning, 7 years old, watching her father's fist coming down because she'd asked why she couldn't hear her wolf like the other children. The impact. The ringing in her ears. His voice, thick with disgust, asking questions is for wolves who matter. She'd stopped asking questions after that. Stopped mattering. Louise blinked and found herself on the training mat, Gerardo crouched in front of her, ice-blue eyes tracking her face with surgical precision. Where did you go? He asked quietly. Somewhere you were hurt. Tell me so I don't send you back there. The gentleness in his command undid something in her chest. My father, she whispered. He didn't like questions. Or mistakes. Or me, really. Gerardo's jaw went tight enough to crack. He's dead, she added quickly. Killed in a territorial dispute when I was 12. It got worse after. She didn't say the rest, that the pack had blamed her for his death somehow, that being unwanted had graduated to being hated. Brian materialized at the training yard's edge, a plate of honeyed bread in his hands. Food first, he said, overruling his twin with a look Louise was learning to recognize their silent communication that didn't need words. You can't train on an empty stomach. That's just torture with extra steps. She took the bread. Took a bite. And then, God help her, she laughed. It was a rusty sound, startled out of her by the absurdity of these massive, terrifying alphas debating the ethics of training schedules like concerned nursemaids. Brian's entire face transformed. Do that again, he demanded. Laugh again. The intensity made her laugh harder, until tears streamed down her face and her healing ribs ached, and Brian looked at Gerardo with something like wonder. I told you she was in there, Brian murmured. Under all that fear. I told you. The twin bond, Louise said later, watching them move through synchronized combat drills that looked like deadly choreography. How does it work? Gerardo blocked Brian's strike without looking, countering with precision that Brian parried half a second before the blow landed. We share everything, Gerardo said. Thoughts when we want to. Emotions we can't hide. Physical sensations if we're close enough. Brian grinned, feral and bright. Which means when Gerardo gets stabbed, I feel it. Really motivates you to protect your other half. Show her, Brian said, his grin softening into something more vulnerable. Gerardo hesitated, then held out his hand. Louise took it, and the world tilted. She felt Brian across the yard, felt his heartbeat synchronize with Gerardo's, felt the mate bond humming between all three of them like a living thing. It should have been invasive. Instead it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. Now you, Gerardo said, releasing her hand. Shift. Show us your wolf. The command punched through her fragile peace. Louise shook her head, backing away. I can't. I've tried. There's nothing there. Brian's hand found her shoulder, steadying. Louise, no. Her voice cracked. You don't understand. There's nothing wrong with my wolf. There is no wolf. I'm broken. Defective. An abomination, just like they said. The breakdown was brutal and complete. 21 years of being told she was wrong, damaged, unworthy, it all came pouring out in great, gasping sobs that left her on her knees in the training yard dirt. Gerardo and Brian bracketed her, not touching but present, and when she finally looked up, she expected pity. Instead she found scars. Gerardo pushed up his sleeve, revealing marks that told stories of survival. Tortured for 3 days by the Crimson Pack when I was 16. They wanted information on Frostborn defenses. I gave them nothing, but I learned what it means to break and still keep breathing. Brian lifted his shirt, showing the scar that ran from shoulder to hip. My father. Our father. He wanted one heir, not two. I tried to solve the problem when we were 8. Gerardo stepped between us. We both still have the scars. We are not whole, Gerardo said, his voice carrying weight that made the words holy. We are scarred and broken and remade from pieces that don't quite fit. But we are here. We survived. And so will you. Brian cupped her face with hands that had killed but held her like porcelain. You are not defective. You are late blooming. Traumatized. Suppressed. But not broken. Never broken. The kiss happened like gravity, inevitable and gentle. Brian leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers with trembling reverence. It tasted like safety and honey and the promise of something Louise had never dared to want. When he pulled back, Gerardo was there, his kiss colder and harder but no less careful, no less precious. You are ours, Gerardo whispered against her mouth. And we are yours. Fate doesn't make mistakes. That night, the pack elders requested an audience. 3 ancient wolves with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. They studied Louise like she was a curiosity, something fascinating and vaguely distasteful. A mute wolf for our alpha's mate, Elder Frost said, her voice dry as winter wind. Shadowcrest's refusal. How unexpected. Gerardo's power rolled out like a physical force. Choose your next words carefully, Elder. But the seed was planted. Louise lay in her bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if saving her had been the brothers' biggest mistake. If loving her would be the thing that finally broke the frozen alphas. Outside her window, the moon hung cold and silent, offering no answers. Only Louise was finally brave enough to ask. The messenger arrived at dawn, his Shadowcrest colors deliberately provocative. Gerardo received him in the great hall with Louise at his side, a statement of possession that made the messenger's lip curl. The scroll he delivered was sealed with 5 different pack sigils. A coalition. Louise's stomach dropped as Gerardo read it aloud, his voice going colder with each word. Return the Omega Louise to Shadowcrest territory within 7 days or face unified war. The coalition of southern packs will not tolerate the kidnapping of pack members by northern aggressors. Kidnapping, Brian repeated, the word dripping venom. They beat her to death and left her in the snow. Now they want her back? The messenger cleared his throat. Beta Jones has formally claimed her as his mate. He demands satisfaction for the theft of his intended. Louise made a sound like she'd been gutted. Jones. The man who'd orchestrated her execution is now claiming mate rights. The sheer obscenity of it made her vision blur. Gerardo dismissed the messenger with a wave that promised violence if he lingered. The moment the hall doors closed, the arguing started. Pack lieutenants materialized, their faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. You'd risk everything for one Omega? Lieutenant Frost demanded. The Frostborn pack against 5 territories? For a wolf who can't even shift? Brian moved so fast he was a blur, slamming Frost against the stone wall hard enough to crack it. Say that again. I dare you. Enough. Gerardo's command cut through the chaos. Louise is our mate. That makes her Luna. We do not negotiate with those who would harm what is ours. But Louise could see. The calculation in his eyes, the cold strategy warring with protective rage. He was counting the cost. Counting their dead before the battle even started. She fled to the fortress library, needing distance from the politics deciding her fate. The ancient texts called to her, promising answers she couldn't articulate. She pulled volumes at random, searching for anything that explained why she existed as she did. 3 hours deep in dusty prophecies, she found it. The words were faded, written in old script that took her minutes to decipher. When wolf society forgets mercy, when the broken are cast out and the silent are deemed worthless, the moon will send her daughter. The lunar Omega, marked by silver and soundlessness, will rise to remind them that strength comes in forms they refuse to see. Louise's hands shook. Silent wolf. Lunar Omega. The text continued, describing powers that sounded like fairy tales, wolves who channeled moonlight, who could heal or destroy with lunar magic. Legends, the margin note said. Myths created to comfort the defective. but Louise's heart hammered with something that might have been recognition. She tore through more texts, finding scattered references to lunar omegas throughout history. Always dismissed. Always called myths. Always appearing in times of great cruelty. You think you're one of them? Gerardo's voice made her jump. He stood in the library doorway with Brian, having tracked her through the bond. I think, Louise said carefully, that maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I'm just different. And maybe that difference matters. She showed them the prophecy, watched their faces shift from skepticism to something more complicated. It doesn't change anything, Brian said finally. Myth or miracle, you're still our mate. Still in danger. Louise slammed the book closed. I won't let you go to war for me. I won't let wolves die because Jones is a monster and I was unlucky enough to be born in his pack. Gerardo's expression went carefully blank. That's not your decision. Like hell it isn't. It's my life. My choice. The argument escalated, voices rising in the empty library. The brothers wanted her locked in the fortress, protected behind stone and steel and frostborn warriors. Louise wanted agency, wanted to stop being someone who needed saving. You saved me from them, she finally shouted, the words ripping out of her. Don't become them. Don't make me a prisoner and call it love. The silence that followed was devastating. Brian looked like she'd struck him. Gerardo's face could have been carved from ice. We would never, he started. You want to lock me in a fortress, Louise interrupted. Tell me how that's different from a cage. Tell me how control dressed up as protection isn't just another way to make me powerless. She left them there, walking out of the library and through the fortress halls until she reached the main gates. The guards moved to stop her, of course they did. She was the precious mate who needed protecting, but Louise felt something shift inside her. The air around her shimmered, and the guards stumbled back, their wolves whining in confusion. She didn't stop to analyze it. She just ran. The mountain was brutal in its indifference. Louise climbed until her lungs burned and her legs screamed, until the fortress was a distant point below and the sky opened up above her in endless blue. She found a peak where the wind howled and sat on the edge of the world, looking out at territories that wanted her dead or controlled or returned like property. The moon was visible even in daylight, a pale ghost against blue sky. If you're real, she whispered to her, if I'm really your daughter, help me know what to do. They found her 2 hours later. Of course they did. The mate bond was a compass that always pointed home. Gerardo and Brian climbed the final ridge in which their wolf forms massive beasts with winter in their eyes before shifting back to humans. They stood on either side of her, not touching, waiting. You can't run from this, Gerardo finally said. From the war or from us? I'm not running from you, Louise replied. I'm running from being something you protect instead of someone you trust. Brian crouched beside her, his ice blue eyes level with hers. We trust you. But trust and protection aren't mutually exclusive. You want to be strong? We'll teach you. You want to fight? We'll train you. But you will not walk into danger alone to prove something to yourself or to us. Then stop treating me like I'm breakable, Louise said. Stop deciding what's too dangerous or too much or too scary for me to handle. I survived 21 years in Shadowcrest. I survived Jones. I survived dying. I think I've earned the right to choose my own risks. Gerardo sat on her other side, the three of them perched on the mountain peak like they were discussing something simple instead of the fundamental terms of their bond. 7 days, he said quietly. We have 7 days before the coalition marches. In 7 days, we figure out if you're truly Lunar Omega or if the prophecy is just desperate hope. We train. We prepare. And then, he looked at her, and for the first time, she saw fear in those cold eyes. Then we faced this together. Not you sacrificing yourself. Not us locking you away. Together. Louise took both their hands, feeling the mate bond pulse with something that might have been compromised or might have been the beginning of real partnership. Together, she agreed. But if I am what the prophecy says, if I am the moon's daughter, then the moon goddess helps anyone who tries to cage me again. Including you. The brothers smiled, feral and fierce, and Louise felt something inside her shift. Not her wolf, not yet, but something older. Something silver and patient and vast. The moon watched from her daylight throne, and Louise could swear she felt approval. 7 days. 7 days to learn what she was. 7 days before everything ended or began. She stood, pulling the brothers up with her, and started back down the mountain. This time, they followed her lead. The supply run to neutral territory should have been routine. Should have been safe. Louise had insisted on joining, refusing to be left behind like precious cargo, and the brothers had agreed with a wary compromise they were still learning to navigate. Gerardo led the small convoy with military precision, Brian ranged ahead as scout, and Louise rode between frostborn warriors who treated her like their Luna even though she still couldn't shift. The neutral zone was a buffer territory maintained by ancient treaty. No pact claimed it, and violence here meant war with everyone. Which was exactly why Shadowcrest chose it for their ambush. They came from everywhere at once. Shadowcrest warriors erupted from the tree line in a coordinated assault that spoke of weeks of planning. Gerardo's roar of warning came half a second too late. The convoy shattered, frostborn fighters engaging attackers in brutal close combat. Louise saw Brian shift mid-leap, his massive wolf form tearing into 3 warriors before they could reach her. Then something exploded, a flashbang grenade, illegal and effective, and the world went white and silent. When her vision cleared, she was alone. The brothers had been driven back by sheer numbers, separated from her by a living wall of Shadowcrest wolves. And walking through that wall, his face split by a smile that promised atrocity, was Jones. "Hello, Defect," he said, his voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "Miss me?" 6 warriors circled her, cutting off any escape. Louise's heart hammered against her ribs, that old familiar terror that tasted like copper and defeat. "The frozen alphas aren't here to save you this time," Jones continued, stalking closer. "Just you and me and the truth you've been running from. You're nothing, Louise. You've always been nothing. A broken Omega pretending to be special because 2 desperate alphas were foolish enough to claim you." He shifted partially, claws extending. "I'm going to finish what I started at the Moon Festival. And this time, I'm going to enjoy it." The warriors closed in. Louise backed up until her spine hit a tree, cornered and weaponless and so tired of being afraid. Jones raised his clawed hand, and something inside her snapped. Not broke, snapped into place, like a lock finally finding its key. The rage that followed wasn't hot. It was cold as moonlight, vast as winter sky, ancient as the first wolf's howl. "No," Louise said, and her voice carried power that made the warriors flinch. "I am not nothing. I am not broken. And I am done being afraid of monsters like you." The shift hit her like lightning. Her bones didn't break and reform, they sang, each cell transforming with crystalline precision. The pain was exquisite, overwhelming, transcendent. Louise threw back her head and howled, and the sound that emerged wasn't the golden call of a normal wolf. It was silver. Pure, resonant, otherworldly. Her body exploded into her true form, and the warriors stumbled back in shock. She was massive. Larger than any Omega should be, nearly the size of an alpha, her fur the color of moonlight made solid. But it was her eyes that made the Shadowcrest wolves whimper, glowing silver, luminescent, holding the weight of the moon itself. Lunar magic manifested around her in visible waves, silver energy that rippled outward like water, like light, like power that had been compressed for 21 years and finally given release. Jones stared at her, his certainty crumbling into fear. What are you?" Louise's wolf answered in a voice that resonated in the space between heartbeats, in a language that predated words. "I am what you tried to destroy. I am what the moon preserved. I am the reckoning for your cruelty." The lunar energy pulsed, and the 6 warriors dropped like puppets with cut strings, unconscious before they hit the ground. Not dead, she could have killed them, felt the power to do so singing through her veins, but she chose mercy. Even now. Even for them. Jones ran. Of course he did. Predators always ran when they finally met something that could bite back. He shifted mid-stride and bolted into the forest, and Louise let him go. Let him run back to his coalition with terror in his heart and a story no one would believe. The battle sounds had stopped. Louise turned her silver head to find the brothers standing at the clearing's edge, their warriors behind them, all of them frozen in shocked stillness. Gerardo shifted to human first, walking toward her with careful steps, like approaching something holy. "Louise?" His voice cracked on her name. She shifted back, the transformation easier this time, flowing like water returning to its source. She stood before them naked and glowing with residual magic, silver light still dancing across her skin. "I'm not broken," she whispered. "I was never broken." Brian caught her as her legs gave out, wrapping her in his coat, holding her like she might disappear. "Lunar Omega," he breathed against her hair. "The prophecy was real. You're real." Gerardo's hands shook as he touched her face, traced the silver that still lingered in her eyes. "You're magnificent. You've always been magnificent." Louise laughed, the sound edged with hysteria and wonder. 21 years of being told she was defective, and she was this. She was power and moonlight and something the wolf world had dismissed as myth. She was the moon goddess's answer to cruelty. She was the blade that cut both ways. Jones escaped, one of the Frostborn warriors reported, his voice awed and wary. "He'll tell the coalition what he saw." Gerardo's expression went cold. "Good. Let them know what they're dealing with." But Louise felt the shift in the air, saw the way the warriors looked at her, not with disgust anymore, but with calculation. With hunger. She wasn't just a mate now. She was a weapon. A tool. A prize that every pack would want to control. "We need to leave," Brian said quietly. "Now. Before word spreads and they come for her in numbers we can't fight." They fled the neutral zone, Louise riding between the brothers, feeling the weight of what she'd become settling on her shoulders like chains made of starlight. Behind them, Jones ran to his coalition with news that would set the wolf world on fire. The broken Omega was a lunar Omega. The defect was a goddess's daughter. And the frozen alphas held the most powerful wolfborn in 1,000 years. The war they'd feared was no longer about returning one Omega. It was about controlling the weapon that could reshape everything. And Louise, still glowing with silver moonlight, realized that being powerful didn't make her free. It just meant everyone wanted to cage her for different reasons. The moon watched from her throne above, and Louise wondered if this was the blessing or the curse the prophecy had promised. Maybe it was both. Maybe it had always been both. The Pack Council convened under emergency protocols, representatives from all territories crowding into the Frostborn Great Hall like vultures circling fresh meat. They didn't come to congratulate Louise on her transformation. They came to negotiate ownership. "The Lunar Omega is too valuable to belong to one pack," Alpha Draven of the Eastern Territories declared, his political smile sharp as knives. "She should be shared. Protected by the collective council." Protected. The word everyone used when they meant controlled. Gerardo stood behind Louise's chair, his hand on her shoulder, possession and protection braided together. "She belongs to herself. She is our mate and your Luna, not your weapon." But Louise could feel the hunger in the room, could smell the greed beneath diplomatic courtesy. They'd gone from wanting her dead to wanting her leashed, and she wasn't sure which was worse. The ancient text spread across the council table told the rest of the story they'd been too afraid to read. Elder Frost translated the old tongue with trembling hands. "The Lunar Omega rises when wolf society forgets the sacred nature of all bonds. When the broken are cast out, when cruelty becomes tradition, the moon bond itself begins to poison. The curse grows with each rejected wolf, each beaten Omega, each pack member told their worth is measured in strength alone." The elder's eyes found Louise. "You are not the cause of the curse. You are its symptom. And its cure." "The ritual," Brian said, his voice tight. "What does it require?" Elder Frost's finger traced archaic symbols. "The Lunar Omega must complete the breaking at the site of her greatest suffering during the blood moon. She must face her trauma, forgive her tormentors, and call upon the moon goddess to cleanse the curse. If she succeeds, the moon bond will be restored to its pure form. If she fails," the elder's pause was heavy with implication, "the curse spreads. Eventually, no wolf will be able to shift. The species dies." Louise felt the weight of every eye in the hall. "The site of greatest suffering," she said quietly. "That's Shadowcrest. The festival grounds where they beat me. Where they'd left her to die. Where Jones had orchestrated her execution like it was entertainment. The place that still visited her nightmares with brutal regularity. The days before the blood moon were chaos." Louise's power became increasingly unstable as the moon waxed fuller. She'd wake to find her room filled with silver light, her wolf trying to emerge without permission. Objects levitated when she was angry. Once, when a visiting alpha made a crude comment about taming her, every window in the fortress shattered simultaneously. The brothers trained her with desperate intensity, teaching her to channel the lunar magic instead of letting it rampage through her unchecked. Focus, Gerardo commanded, his voice cutting through her frustration. The power doesn't control you. You control it. But Louise could feel the moon pulling at her, demanding something she didn't know how to give. Brian caught her when her legs gave out, the magic drain leaving her shaking and exhausted. You're trying too hard, he murmured against her temple. Stop fighting it. Stop fighting yourself. That night, she let them see her. Really see her, all the fear and rage and desperate hope she'd been holding back. The mate bond opened like a flower, and suddenly they were sharing everything. Her memories of Jones's fists, their memories of finding her broken in the snow. Her terror of the ritual, their terror of losing her. The intimacy was devastating and complete, stripping away every defense until all that remained was truth. They were three broken things that had found each other in the dark. I love you, Louise whispered against Gerardo's mouth, then turned to Brian. Both of you. I love you, and it terrifies me. Brian's laugh was wet with tears. Good. Love should terrify you. Means it's real. Gerardo's kiss tasted like promises and goodbye, like he could already feel her slipping away toward the ritual that might kill her. Jones's message arrived 2 days before the blood moon, delivered by a lone wolf who looked half dead from fear. The scroll was simple and vicious. Complete the ritual with me as your mate, acknowledge me as your true alpha, or I will kill the frozen twins slowly while you watch. You have until the blood moon rises. Choose wisely, defect. The brothers' rage was incandescent. Brian shifted involuntarily, his wolf demanding blood. Gerardo's eyes went winter cold, the temperature in the hall dropping 10 degrees. We attack Shadowcrest at moonrise, he announced to his warriors. We end this. We end Jones. We end any pack that thinks they can threaten what is ours. But Louise stared at the message and felt the final piece click into place. She saw the shape of the ritual, understood what the prophecy demanded. The site of greatest suffering, she said softly. It has to be me. Alone. The brothers turned to her, and she saw their refusal before they spoke. Breaking requires me to face my trauma. That means facing them, facing Jones without you there to save me. That's the curse, we keep trying to save each other instead of letting each other be strong. No, Brian said flatly. Absolutely not. We don't send you into Shadowcrest alone. Gerardo's expression was stone. We'll find another way. Another ritual. Another, there is no other way, Louise interrupted. You know there isn't. The prophecy is clear, I have to do this alone, or it doesn't work. I have to prove that the broken can stand without being saved. That's how the curse breaks. The argument that followed shook the fortress foundations. The brothers refused to let her go. Louise refused to let them turn the ritual into another battle where wolves died for her. They went in circles, desperation making them cruel, love making them uncompromising. Finally, exhausted and hollow, they reached the same stalemate they always did, trust versus control, protection versus freedom, love versus letting go. Louise stood at her window that night, watching the moon grow fat and red in the sky. One more night until the blood moon. One more night until she walked into Shadowcrest alone and faced the wolves who tried to destroy her. One more night until she broke the curse or died trying. The brothers slept in her bed, wrapped around her like they could keep her safe through proximity alone. But Louise stayed awake, feeling the lunar magic building in her bones, feeling the inevitability of what was coming. She would go to Shadowcrest. She would face Jones and the pack that had tortured her. She would stand in the place where she'd bled and begged and died inside 1,000 times. And she would do it alone, because that was what the moon goddess demanded. That was what breaking the curse required. The brothers could attack during the ritual, could wage their war while she performed the breaking. But the ritual itself is the facing, the forgiving, the calling down of divine intervention that had to be hers alone. The blood moon rises tomorrow. Louise closed her eyes and prayed she was strong enough to survive what came next. Prayed the brothers would forgive her for what she was about to do. Prayed the moon goddess was real and listening and gave a damn about one broken Omega trying to heal a poisoned world. Outside, the moon hung crimson in the sky, patient and terrible and waiting. The blood moon rose like an open wound, staining the sky crimson and turning the frostborn fortress into something out of a nightmare. Louise felt it in her bones, the pull, the inevitability, the moon demanding what it was owed. She found the brothers in the war room, surrounded by maps and weapons, orchestrating an assault that would paint Shadowcrest red with vengeance. They'd made their choice without consulting her. She was going to stay locked in the fortress, safe and protected, while they waged war on her behalf. No, Louise said from the doorway, and both brothers froze. Gerardo didn't turn around. You're not going to Shadowcrest. We've already discussed this. You discussed it, Louise corrected. I'm telling you, lock me in this fortress, and you become exactly what you saved me from. Brian moved to block the door, his face anguished. We can't lose you. Don't ask us to let you walk into that alone. The mate bond throbbed between them, screaming with their combined fear and love and desperation. I'm not asking permission, Louise said quietly. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can trust me to be strong enough, or you can try to cage me. But if you cage me, her voice broke. If you make that choice, then you're not my mates. You're just more alphas who think they know better. Gerardo finally turned, his ice blue eyes burning with fury and terror. You want to talk about choices? Fine. Here's mine. I choose you alive and angry over you dead and free. I choose you hating me in this fortress over you bleeding out in Shadowcrest. I choose to live with your resentment rather than bury your body. The rawness in his voice cut deeper than claws. So yes, Louise. We're locking you in. We're protecting you against your will. And we'll spend the rest of our lives earning your forgiveness. You saved me from them, Louise whispered, tears streaming down her face. You pulled me from the snow and told me I was worth protecting. You showed me what it meant to be chosen. Don't become them. Don't take my choices and call it love. She felt the lunar magic rising in response to her desperation, and felt the blood moon singing in her veins. I am not yours to keep. I am yours to stand beside. There's a difference. Brian reached for her. Louise, please, she let the magic loose. The moonlight pouring through the window became liquid, became a path, became transportation. One moment she stood in the war room, the next she was dissolving into silver light, her body becoming moonbeam and intention. She heard the brothers' roar of denial, felt them reaching through the mate bond to pull her back, but the blood moon was stronger. The lunar magic was stronger. Her choice was stronger. She reformed in the Shadowcrest festival grounds, the same clearing where she died, where Jones had beaten her into meat and left her for the cold. The same place her pack had celebrated while she bled. Louise stood in the center of that space, her silver wolf form glowing like a beacon, and waited. They came from the shadows like wolves always did, circling, testing, afraid but hungry. Her former pack. The wolves who'd watched her suffer for 21 years and done nothing. They surrounded her, dozens of them, and behind them Louise could see more. Hundreds more. The coalition. Every southern pack is drawn by the promise of blood or power or both. Jones walked through the circle, and he'd done something to himself, taken an alpha position somehow, his power rolling out in waves that made the lesser wolves cringe. You came, he said, and his smile was the same one he'd worn while beating her. Stupid. Brave, maybe, but stupid. He shifted partially, that horror show between man and wolf that alphas could hold indefinitely. The frozen alphas aren't here to save you this time. So here's what's going to happen, defect. You're going to submit to me. Acknowledge me as your true mate. Complete your little ritual with me by your side. And maybe I'll let those northern bastards live. Or, Jones continued, stalking closer, you refuse, and I kill them when they inevitably come charging in to save you. Either way, you're mine. You've always been mine. The moon goddess just needed to give you power so that when I break you, it'll actually matter. The coalition wolves pressed closer, a living wall of teeth and hunger. Louise counted them 200, maybe more. Warriors from every southern pack, drawn by greed or orders or the promise of controlling the lunar omega. Louise shifted to human form, standing naked and glowing in the crimson moonlight. I am not yours, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with lunar resonance. I have never been yours. And what happens next, what I do here has nothing to do with you. She felt the brothers in the mate bond, felt them racing across territories, felt their terror and rage and love burning like wildfire. They'd be here soon. Minutes, maybe. But the ritual had to happen now, under the apex of the blood moon, and it had to be her choice. The brothers' rage was incandescent. Brian shifted involuntarily, his wolf demanding blood. Gerardo's eyes went winter cold, the temperature in the hall dropping 10 degrees. "We attack Shadowcrest at moonrise," he announced to his warriors. "We end this. We end Jones. We end any pack that thinks they can threaten what is ours." But Louise stared at the message and felt the final piece click into place. She saw the shape of the ritual, understood what the prophecy demanded. "The site of greatest suffering," she said softly. "It has to be me. Alone." The brothers turned to her, and she saw their refusal before they spoke. "Breaking requires me to face my trauma. That means facing them, facing Jones without you there to save me. That's the curse. We keep trying to save each other instead of letting each other be strong." "No," Brian said flatly. "Absolutely not. We don't send you into Shadowcrest alone." Gerardo's expression was stone. "We'll find another way. Another ritual." "Another, there is no other way," Louise interrupted. "You know there isn't. The prophecy is clear, I have to do this alone, or it doesn't work. I have to prove that the broken can stand without being saved. That's how the curse breaks." The argument that followed shook the fortress foundations. The brothers refused to let her go. Louise refused to let them turn the ritual into another battle where wolves died for her. They went in circles, desperation making them cruel, love making them uncompromising. Finally, exhausted and hollow, they reached the same stalemate they always did: trust versus control, protection versus freedom, love versus letting go. Louise stood at her window that night, watching the moon grow fat and red in the sky. One more night until the blood moon. One more night until she walked into Shadowcrest alone and faced the wolves who tried to destroy her. One more night until she broke the curse or died trying. The brothers slept in her bed, wrapped around her like they could keep her safe through proximity alone. But Louise stayed awake, feeling the lunar magic building in her bones, feeling the inevitability of what was coming. She would go to Shadowcrest. She would face Jones and the pack that had tortured her. She would stand in the place where she'd bled and begged and died inside 1,000 times. And she would do it alone, because that was what the moon goddess demanded. That was what breaking the curse required. The brothers could attack during the ritual, could wage their war while she performed the breaking. But the ritual itself is the facing, the forgiving, the calling down of divine intervention that had to be hers alone. The blood moon rises tomorrow. Louise closed her eyes and prayed she was strong enough to survive what came next. Prayed the brothers would forgive her for what she was about to do. Prayed the moon goddess was real and listening and gave a damn about one broken Omega trying to heal a poisoned world. Outside, the moon hung crimson in the sky, patient and terrible and waiting. The blood moon rose like an open wound, staining the sky crimson and turning the frostborn fortress into something out of a nightmare. Louise felt it in her bones, the pull, the inevitability, the moon demanding what it was owed. She found the brothers in the war room, surrounded by maps and weapons, orchestrating an assault that would paint Shadowcrest red with vengeance. They'd made their choice without consulting her. She was going to stay locked in the fortress, safe and protected, while they waged war on her behalf. "No," Louise said from the doorway, and both brothers froze. Gerardo didn't turn around. "You're not going to Shadowcrest. We've already discussed this." "You discussed it," Louise corrected. "I'm telling you, lock me in this fortress, and you become exactly what you saved me from." Brian moved to block the door, his face anguished. "We can't lose you. Don't ask us to let you walk into that alone." The mate bond throbbed between them, screaming with their combined fear and love and desperation. "I'm not asking permission," Louise said quietly. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can trust me to be strong enough, or you can try to cage me. But if you cage me," her voice broke. "If you make that choice, then you're not my mates. You're just more alphas who think they know better." Gerardo finally turned, his ice blue eyes burning with fury and terror. "You want to talk about choices? Fine. Here's mine. I choose you alive and angry over you dead and free. I choose you hating me in this fortress over you bleeding out in Shadowcrest. I choose to live with your resentment rather than bury your body." The rawness in his voice cut deeper than claws. "So yes, Louise. We're locking you in. We're protecting you against your will. And we'll spend the rest of our lives earning your forgiveness." "You saved me from them," Louise whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You pulled me from the snow and told me I was worth protecting. You showed me what it meant to be chosen. Don't become them. Don't take my choices and call it love. She felt the lunar magic rising in response to her desperation, and felt the blood moon singing in her veins. I am not yours to keep. I am yours to stand beside. There's a difference. Brian reached for her. Louise, please, she let the magic loose. The moonlight pouring through the window became liquid, became a path, became transportation. One moment she stood in the war room, the next she was dissolving into silver light, her body becoming moonbeam and intention. She heard the brothers' roar of denial, felt them reaching through the mate bond to pull her back, but the blood moon was stronger. The lunar magic was stronger. Her choice was stronger. She reformed in the Shadowcrest Festival grounds, the same clearing where she died, where Jones had beaten her into meat and left her for the cold. The same place her pack had celebrated while she bled. Louise stood in the center of that space, her silver wolf form glowing like a beacon, and waited. They came from the shadows like wolves always did, circling, testing, afraid but hungry. Her former pack. The wolves who'd watched her suffer for 21 years and done nothing. They surrounded her, dozens of them, and behind them Louise could see more. Hundreds more. The coalition. Every southern pack is drawn by the promise of blood or power or both. Jones walked through the circle, and he'd done something to himself, taken an alpha position somehow, his power rolling out in waves that made the lesser wolves cringe. You came, he said, and his smile was the same one he'd worn while beating her. Stupid. Brave, maybe, but stupid. He shifted partially, that horror show between man and wolf that alphas could hold indefinitely. The frozen alphas aren't here to save you this time. So here's what's going to happen, defect. You're going to submit to me. Acknowledge me as your true mate. Complete your little ritual with me by your side. And maybe I'll let those northern bastards live. Or, Jones continued, stalking closer, you refuse, and I kill them when they inevitably come charging in to save you. Either way, you're mine. You've always been mine. The moon goddess just needed to give you power so that when I break you, it'll actually matter. The coalition wolves pressed closer, a living wall of teeth and hunger. Louise counted them 200, maybe more. Warriors from every southern pack, drawn by greed or orders or the promise of controlling the lunar omega. Louise shifted to human form, standing naked and glowing in the crimson moonlight. I am not yours, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with lunar resonance. I have never been yours. And what happens next, what I do here has nothing to do with you. She felt the brothers in the mate bond, felt them racing across territories, felt their terror and rage and love burning like wildfire. They'd be here soon. Minutes, maybe. But the ritual had to happen now, under the apex of the blood moon, and it had to be her choice. Jones laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. Look around you, defect. Hundreds of us. One of you. You think your silver fur makes you special? You think those northern monsters can save you from this? He gestured to the coalition. Even if they survive the journey here, they'll arrive to find you already bent and broken. Already mine. You're wrong about so many things, Louise said softly. But mostly this, you think power comes from breaking others. You think strength means making people afraid. She felt the lunar magic building, felt the blood moon reaching its apex, felt the moment of the ritual crystallizing like ice. Let me show you what real power looks like. The silver light erupted from her like a star-going supernova, and the festival grounds became day-bright with lunar magic. The coalition wolves stumbled back, whimpering, their wolves recognizing something older than pack law, older than alpha dominance. Louise's true form emerged, not quite wolf, not quite human, something transcendent and terrible and beautiful. The moon goddess's daughter, finally claiming her birthright. I am Louise, she said, and her voice was thundering and whispering simultaneously. I am the wolf you tried to destroy. I am the omega you deemed defective. I am the silent one the moon chose to speak for the broken. She turned slowly, making eye contact with every wolf in that circle. And I am here to offer you something you never offered me, a choice. Behind the coalition line, she felt the brothers arrive. Felt them stop at the edge of the clearing, held back by the sheer wall of lunar power radiating from her. Felt their fear and pride and love and terror all tangled together in the bond. But they didn't charge in. They didn't try to save her. They watched. They waited. They trusted me. And Louise, standing in the place of her greatest trauma, facing the wolves who tortured her, chose mercy. Choose breaking the curse over vengeance. Choose healing over hate. The blood moon pulsed overhead, waiting for her decision, and Louise took a breath and began the ritual that would either save them all or destroy everything. The brothers tore through the coalition line like winter through autumn, brutal, inevitable, unstoppable. Gerardo's wolf was ice and rage made flesh, Brian's was vengeance with teeth, and together they carved a path of broken bodies toward the center of the clearing where Louise stood bathed in crimson moonlight. But when they burst through the final ring of warriors, ready to defend their mate against impossible odds, they stopped. Because Louise wasn't fighting. She wasn't fleeing. She stood calmly in the center of a circle of hostile wolves, glowing with lunar power, and she looked like a goddess deciding which mortals to smite. Jones circled her like he still had control, like his partial shift and stolen alpha dominance meant anything against what Louise had become. There they are, he announced to the coalition. The frozen alphas, right on schedule. So protective. So predictable. He turned to Louise, his smile vicious. Here's how this ends, defect. You submit to me right now, complete your ritual with me as your mate, or I give the order and 200 wolves tear your precious alphas apart while you watch. The brothers shifted to human form, standing at the circle's edge. Gerardo's eyes found Louise's, and through the mate bond she felt his readiness to fight, to die if necessary, to take as many of them down as possible before the end. Louise, he said quietly. We're here. We've got you. Brian's hand went to the blade at his hip. Say the word and we end this. They moved toward her, toward Jones, toward the violence they'd been built for. Louise spoke a single word, stop. The lunar power in her voice made it a command that bypassed pack hierarchy, bypassed alpha dominance, and bypassed everything except the moon bond itself. The brothers froze mid-step, their wolves whining with the need to obey something older than their instincts. Louise turned slowly, addressing not just Jones or the coalition, but every wolf present. I am not your Omega, she said, and her voice carried across the clearing with the resonance of divine proclamation. It is not Shadowcrest's fault. I am not property to be claimed or a weapon to be controlled. The blood moon pulsed overhead, and Louise felt the ritual beginning, felt the curse's poison rising to be purged or perpetuated. I am the moon's daughter. And I am done being afraid of you. The transformation was transcendent. Her wolf form erupted from her human skin, but this wasn't the silver wolf from the ambush, this was something else entirely. Massive beyond any wolf that had ever lived, her fur glowing with light that seemed to come from within, her eyes twin moons that held the weight of eternity. Lunar magic radiated from her invisible waves, silver and crimson mixing, power that made the air vibrate and the ground tremble. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. She was inevitable. When Louise spoke, the language that emerged was ancient, the first tongue, the moon language that predated pack law and territory and cruelty. I am the breaking, she said, and every wolf understood despite never having heard those words before. I am the reckoning for your sins against the sacred bond. Kneel. The lunar dominance that rolled off her wasn't a request. It was gravity. It was the moon pulling at tides. Every wolf in that clearing alpha, beta, omega, warrior dropped to their knees. Not by choice. By inevitability. The coalition bowed. The brothers bowed. Even Jones, fighting it with everything he had, felt his knees buckle and hit the earth. The blood moon ritual crystallized around Louise like ice forming on water. She felt the curse laid bare centuries of cruelty, of wolves cast out for being different, of omegas beaten for being defective, of strength measured only in dominance. The poison had spread through the moon bond itself, corrupting the sacred connection that made them wolves. And now the ritual demanded her choice, vengeance or mercy. Justice or forgiveness. She could kill every wolf who'd ever hurt her, who'd ever hurt anyone like her. The power to do so sang in her veins, righteous and terrible. Louise looked at Jones, still forced to his knees, terror finally breaking through his cruelty. She looked at her former pack, the wolves who'd watched her suffer and did nothing. She looked at the coalition who'd come here to control her. And she chose mercy. I forgive you, she said in the moon language, and the words cost her everything. Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was acceptable. But because the curse ends with me. Because someone has to choose healing over hate. Because mercy is not weakness, it's the hardest strength there is. The blood moon exploded with light. The sky ripped open and there she was, the moon goddess herself, not metaphor or legend but manifest divinity descending to the festival grounds. She was silver and crimson and ancient beyond comprehension, and when she spoke, reality itself paused to listen. Louise, daughter of the moon, you have broken the curse through sacrifice that asked nothing in return. You are Luna, not of one pack, but of all packs. You are the law that supersedes alpha dominance. You are the reminder that strength comes in forms they refuse to see. The goddess's hand touched Louise's massive wolf head, and the blessing burned through her like starlight. Let it be known, the goddess proclaimed to every wolf forced to witness, that all wolves are sacred. The broken, the silent, the different, they are not mistakes. They are my gifts. And anyone who harms them harms me. The brothers rose first, shifting to their true forms, massive winter wolves that flanked Louise like an honor guard. But then they did something unprecedented. They knelt again. By choice this time. Acknowledging their mate not as something to protect, but as something to follow. Luna, Gerardo said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Our equal. Our alpha. Brian's voice joined his twins. We kneel not in submission, but in recognition. Let us. Jones remained on his knees, but now it was despair that kept him there instead of lunar dominance. I could have had this, he whispered, staring at Louise's transcendent form. If I'd chosen differently, the realization broke him more thoroughly than any punishment could have. He'd destroyed his chance at greatness through cruelty. He'd turned his fated mate into his destroyer through pride. The tragedy of it made even Louise ache. New law, Louise declared, her voice returning to something wolves could speak. All wolves are sacred regardless of how their gifts manifest. Difference is not a defect. Silence is not weakness. Anyone who violates this law answers to me. To us. She looked at her mates, and they rose to stand beside her, 3 wolves of equal power, bound by choice and love and something stronger than fate. The coalition dispersed in awed silence. The curse was broken. The moon bond glowed clean and pure for the first time in centuries. And Louise, the defective Omega, the broken wolf, the silent one, stood with her mates under the blood moon and finally understood what she'd always been, extraordinary. Months later, Louise ruled beside the brothers from a fortress that had become a sanctuary for the different, the broken, the wolves that other packs had cast out. They came to her, the ones who couldn't shift, the ones whose gifts manifested strangely, the ones told they were worthless. And Louise welcomed them all. Reformed pack society, one wolf at a time. Proved that mercy was stronger than dominance, that love was braver than hate. On nights when the moon was full, 3 wolves could be seen on the mountain peak, silver, white, and white, their howls harmonizing in a song that reminded the world what sacred meant. And the packs learned slowly, painfully, beautifully, that the greatest strength is not in domination, but in recognizing the extraordinary in what others call broken.